Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Low Production Value Sphere podcast, which is shot from my terrorist hideout in the unrecognized nation of the Western Sahara. I have a very good guest today whose name is John Coogan, and he runs a company called Lucy. I'm just going to let you, very good, very good. I'm just going to let you explain what the company is and what it does.
Sure. So we are a tobacco-free nicotine company, meaning that we sell pouches, nicotine gums. We also sold nicotine lozenges for a long time. So products that do not contain tobacco, but they do contain nicotine. We started the company in 2016 and have been building it for the last going on 9 years now, mostly based in the United States. Sell on e-commerce and in retail stores, and have been working with the FDA to get our products authorized. And I'm sure we'll talk about everything involved with that over the next hour, however long we talk. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, very cool. As I was saying before the show, as a Frenchman, I'm obviously a fan of all things nicotine. I'm also a fan of all things tobacco, but those are two different things, which is
Yes.
important for people to understand. Um, and so, well, okay, so let's start with a sort of broad overview of the landscape
Sure.
because this is the key thing. The sort of the law or the regulatory landscape or whatever hasn't caught up to the fact that not everything that contains nicotine is a cigarette.
Yes.
And so that creates a problem if you want to bring a new nicotine product to the market.
Yes.
um so how does that work exactly? And then we'll get into the weeds, but at the sort of high level, I'm Jim. I want to start a new company
Mm.
making pouches. What do I do? How many people in the government do I need to talk to before I can get a product in front of consumers?
Yeah. I mean, it depends heavily on what country you're operating in and what kind of
Yeah,
consumer
I
you're
in the
targeting.
United
But
States.
in the United States, I mean, the U.S. has a fraught relationship with nicotine and tobacco. Humans have consumed nicotine and tobacco for thousands of years. Typically, actually, originally used orally, just putting the tobacco leaves in their mouths. Burial rituals for various different. Like very ancient civilizations used tobacco in all sorts of spiritual rituals. Then, turn of the century, the cigarette rolling machine is popularized, and all of a sudden cigarettes become very, very cheap, and they become something that people can smoke 20 of in a day, and you get the rise of the pack a day smoker. Through industrialization, it becomes very easy to chain smoke all day long, and those products led to very high rates of lung cancer. So something like 50% of daily smokers over their entire lifetime will have smoking be directly responsible for their demise ultimately. And it takes something like 10 years off of a person's life if they're smoking cigarettes every single day constantly. And so the US knew that this was a problem. The Surgeon General report goes out. Eventually, there's a master settlement agreement. There is a relationship between a settlement between the US government and all the big tobacco companies saying, hey, we know this is a problem. And in order to get basically in order to internalize the negative externality, which is the cost on the health system of all these people going into the hospital system and racking up fees and bills for their lung cancer, big tobacco would have to pay. And so in the 90s, the master settlement agreement is finalized. But then in the early to mid 2000s, 2010, there's a rise of a new class of product: e-cigarettes, vapor products, also tobacco-free nicotine pouches. And so there is a push in 2008 by the Obama administration to pass the Tobacco Control Act. And this gives the FDA proper authority over tobacco containing products, which they didn't have before. And so if you think back to the history of tobacco regulation, a lot of it was done through the FTC or the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. And so when they'd slap the big tobacco companies' hands They wouldn't say your products are unapproved drugs. This is an FDA issue. They would say this is an FCC issue. This is an advertising issue. You've been going around saying 9 out of 10 doctors recommend smoking Marlboros or whatever. You can't say that anymore. No more advertising to kids. No more advertising on TV. No more billboards. They used to have a camel smoking a cigarette in Times Square, New York, in Manhattan, and it would puff vapor. They had it was like a smokestack that would smoke, and there were tons of these ads that were encouraging people to smoke. They said, "Look, you guys can keep selling these,
Marlboro Man,
the Marlboro Man."
iconic.
Exactly. You guys can keep selling them, but you basically can't advertise. You can't advertise anywhere where there are kids. Sure, you can put up, display units in gas stations and tobacco stores, but we're not going to let you run Super Bowl ads. We're not going to let you advertise on kids' cartoons anymore. No more ads from you guys. It was an FCC issue. That wasn't enough because a lot of people were flooding the market with new products that didn't quite conform to the definition of a cigarette, things like e-cigarettes. So they would be free to run ads. And so it actually made more sense for the government to look at this as a drug or a nutritional supplement, something like the way energy drinks are regulated or alcohol is regulated or stimulants and, all sorts of Ozempic, all these things that are regulated by the FDA. And so the Food and Drug Administration gets regulatory authority in 2008. And it takes them a while to spin up this new organization. Now, the FDA is a very large organization. They oversee something like 5 or 6 different groups of products. So one would be drugs, like cancer drugs, Ozempic, Adderall. All of these are drugs that the FDA oversees. Now, there's nutritional supplements, that protein powder. You can kind of say anything. It's very loose regulation there. You don't have to get them approved. It's not like you need a new, double-blinded trial to bring a new protein shake to market. Then there's foods, there's veterinary medicine, there's medical devices. So the machine that actually tests your blood for the level of testosterone or cholesterol, that's a machine that's approved by the FDA. And so they have a whole bunch of different governing bodies within the FDA. They set up a new one, the Center for Tobacco Products, CTP. CTP takes some time. Eventually, they come out with what's called the deeming rule. And it goes into effect on August 8th, 2016. It's no coincidence that our company was started shortly before August 8th, 2016. And the reason is because before the deeming rule went into effect, you could launch products and then essentially keep marketing the product, keep growing the product, keep selling the product until the FDA gave you the thumbs up or the thumbs down. But if you came to market after August 8th, 2016, you would have to wait for an affirmative authorization from the FDA to say, you're
Oh.
good, you can sell this product. And so to answer your question, if you want to start a new company in the United States that sells a tobacco containing product, or now just a nicotine containing product, in theory, if you are abiding by the law, you should start by formulating your product in a lab, making sure that the ingredients are high quality, making sure that the customer experience is as you intend it, get the flavor right, get the texture right, get all the ingredients right. And then you take that and you start doing studies on it and you figure out, how does it affect the consumer? Is the material hazardous to the environment? What happens if you leave this in the trunk of your car for 2 years? Is it going to go bad? Is it just going to be ineffective, or is it going to hurt the person? Right? We want to know: is it going to cause problems? Is it going to cause cancer? And so nicotine, well, certainly addictive, is not nicotine is not a carcinogen. And so what that means is that if you're consuming pure
Yes.
nicotine, the most aggressive example of this would be Nicorette, you are unlikely to get cancer from Nicorette, for example. But there are plenty of other substances that you could put in a nicotine gum that could cause cancer, that aren't nicotine. You could add back tobacco, right? And then you would be adding back cancer. And so that's what the FDA is testing for. And so they want to make sure that your product is doing more harm than good. They are in the harm reduction business, and their mandate is this product suitable for the protection of public health? The FDA is mandated to protect the public health of Americans. And so after you formulate your product, you do a bunch of studies, you write down all the ingredients, all the suppliers, how it's made, all these different things. You put that together into what's called a PMTA application, the pre-market tobacco application. Thousands of pages, sometimes hundreds of thousands of pages. Some companies, big tobacco companies, have spent hundreds of millions of dollars on these applications. It is
Wow.
akin to getting a cancer drug approved in some cases. You can also do it cheaper. There are different ways to build out that application. You turn that into the FDA. They review it. Some of these products have been in review for almost a decade. Some of them might get approved quickly. We don't really know. Not many have been approved, but you look at the case of Zyn, which is developed by Swedish Match. That came to the market in 2016, actually 2014. It took a decade to get approved, and now it is authorized. And so you, in theory, should do all of that work, file your PMTA, wait for the FDA to give you the thumbs up, authorize your product, and once they do, then you can go and sell the first unit in America.
Okay, so there's a million things I want to go into
Please.
in there. So just to get the highlights, it took 10 years for a Swedish company. So the nicotine pouches are basically a Swedish invention, or
Yes,
if they didn't invent it, they popularized it.
totally.
So this was like an established company
Yep.
from a serious country, not Zimbabwe,
Totally.
a country
Just
where
to
they have
ground it,
serious
they were doing $2 billion in revenue, and they were purchased for 16 billion. So you can think about this like, a $16 billion company has thousands of employees, tons of PhDs, tons of scientists, tons of people in Washington. They had offices in Washington, D.C., specifically just to say, hey, FDA, you want to meet with us? We'll send over our guy. Hey, there's a cocktail hour with some senator over there. Let's send over our guy to put in a good word. That type of stuff was going on for a long time, and it still took a decade. And the reason was because at first it wasn't a super popular product, so it wasn't high priority. The FDA was dealing with COVID. The FDA was dealing with Juul, and then they got to Zyn, and then also they really want to get the science right. So to kind of steelman the FDA, moving slowly, they think about it as, we really, really, really want to make sure that these new products are actually suitable for the protection of public health, and they're not causing a new health crisis. So
Yeah.
that's why they take so long.
So, but just wanted to get out there on the record how onerous this process is. Okay, so you described the deeming rule. Can you explain what that is?
Yes. So uh, when the FDA got regulatory authority, there were a lot of products that had been on the market for a long time. Case in point, Marlboro. Marlboro has been sold for uh, 70 years in its current incarnation, essentially. It was originally a woman's cigarette, actually. And then they went to a Madison Avenue, kind of literally like Mad Men. If you've seen Mad Men, the show,
Yeah.
they went to some of those guys, and they decided, hey, we have this filtered cigarette technology. We think that men might like this. What can we do to make this a more masculine cigarette? We have this thing. It's called Marlboro. It had a GH at the end. Let's rebrand it and relaunch it as the man's cigarette. And Leo Burnett, the marketer on the project, the outside marketing agency, the Don Draper of the era, said, what's masculine? And he said, it's a cowboy. And he took a picture of a cowboy and he put Marlboro Country over it. And he was so excited that he printed it out and he walked up and down the office and said, isn't this the greatest thing I've ever created? This is the greatest thing. This is going to be amazing. And he was 100% right. And it's hilarious because it does not seem that complicated to me. Maybe that's just historical look back.
That's just genius. That's just, you can't.
So simple, right? So simple, but it really did work. And men picked up Marlboro in droves. And so Marlboro is currently the number one cigarette in America. And it's a, $50 billion asset, maybe. I don't know. I think they sell billions of dollars worth of Marlboros every year, still like clockwork. Altria is a massive company because of it. It's their cash cow product. And, and all of that marketing drove massive adoption. Then the question was, okay, the FDA has regulatory authority over Marlboro. What are we going to do with Marlboro? Like, we're not just going to ban it, because that was the deal that was struck during the master settlement agreement. It was, don't ban us and we'll pay states and local governments for the damage that we're doing. And so what they said was, we need to create a cutoff date. The Essentially, like, if your product was on the market before, I believe it was like 1996, you would never have to submit a PMTA. You were just default approved.
Oh.
And so that put all of the old cigarettes in there. Now, it's still technically complicated because Marlboro does make small changes to like the paper and the filter, and they redo their supply chain every couple of years, and like there are small tweaks that no one would ever notice, but legally from an FDA perspective, there's a question of do they need to submit a new PMTA? But essentially, there's a deeming rule, and it said we have deemed that these products are they're on the market already. We're not going to do anything about them. We're just going to kind of leave them untouched. We've educated people. There's been billboards all over the world that say smoking kills. So people know that they're dangerous. We're not going to touch them. We're not going to ban them. But what about the new stuff? What about the Juul? What about the Blue? What about the Enjoy? What about the Zyn? Well, those, they're going to be deemed as well, but they're going to be deemed in the sense that they were on the market before August 8th, 2016, which means they're not good forever. They still need to submit the PMTA, but we're not going to take them off the market. We're not going to shut them down unless we can prove that they're harmful. And so they have the chance to prove to us. And so what did they all do? They all came and they did a bunch of research studies. They did blood tests and analytical biology and chemistry, and they show you a mass spec of every single ingredient of what's in these things. Send that into the FDA. The FDA for Enjoy, they said looks good. You're approved. For Juul, they said you're denied, but then they eventually rescinded that and gave Juul kind of a do-over. It's a more complicated situation that we can get into. And then for Zyn, they just took a long time, and then eventually they said Zyn's good to go, and they authorized Zyn. But it took years, right? And so the deeming rule is basically the creating the bucket of what is deemed to be a pre deeming rule product, which
Right,
is allowed to
right.
be sold. Then if you're an entrepreneur and you just decide, hey, I want to start a company here, I'm just going to jump in. You don't have a deemed product, and in theory, the FDA should shut you down or could shut you down, and they have for a lot of products that haven't been deemed or came to the market after August 8th, 2016, through a loophole or maybe just through skirting the law entirely. And there's been lots of stories about fly by night vape companies, fly by night companies internationally shipping products in, ignoring the FDA regulations, and because they are not deemed, because they cannot prove that their products were sold before August 8th, 2016. The FDA has the ability to ban them from imports, send them marketing letters, fine them, do all these things that they have authority to do.
All right. That was very clear. All right. Now let's talk about PMTAs. So,
Yes.
what's a PMTA and how much is it going to cost me?
Yeah. Uh, PMTAs are the pre-market tobacco application. And so what you are trying to do is you are trying to meet the criteria set forth by the FDA that your product is suitable for the protection of public health. And what that means is that we have a cigarette epidemic. We have a smoking crisis. A lot of people smoke cigarettes. And products that can get people to switch from cigarettes to alternatives that are less harmful, they have a net good. You take someone who's smoking a pack a day and you move them to a less harmful product like a vapor product or a tobacco-free nicotine product. In theory, you can extend their life and improve their health outcomes and reduce the risk of lung cancer. But there is a risk because you could wind up converting no smokers, helping no smokers quit, and only getting children to use nicotine. And we know that children who use nicotine become much more addicted to nicotine and they stay addicted much longer. And if you talk to people who use nicotine and they started when they were 30, they will often tell you, and there's some data that supports this, they will often tell you that, yeah, I use it and I use it a lot, but when I go on a vacation and I don't bring it with me, it's actually pretty easy to kind of quit cold turkey, or I can take breaks. But when you talk to somebody who is like, yeah, I picked up smoking when I was 15, I was smoking and vaping constantly, it's much harder because your brain's still developing. And when your brain's developing, you get used to the patterns of things. People worry about this with gambling. You play a lot of, slot machine games as a kid, some video game that has loot boxes, you become a gambler, and then later in life, you struggle with a gambling addiction. And so the FDA is trying to look at how much good are you doing? Essentially, how many people are you keeping from smoking, getting them to stop smoking? How much are you doing to help the health of people versus how many kids are you initiating? How many people are having bad health outcomes? And there's other things like, it's totally possible to formulate a product that while it just has pure nicotine, it has some other chemical that hurts your lungs. We kind of got a scare of this with like the popcorn lung vitamin E acetate EVOLI scandal that happened in 2018ish. And during that, this wasn't nicotine vapes. This was actually cannabis vapes, but they had a chemical in there that would cause acute lung injury. And so if you look at the difference between, well, cigarettes cause chronic lung injury. Do I really want to trade that for acute lung injury? Probably not. That shouldn't be on the table. And so the FDA moved very quickly. And actually, the CDC and a lot of other organizations worked on that as well to stop those harmful products from being on the market. And so the PMTA is your chance as a founder or a business owner to prove to the FDA, to send all the data to show that your product is not harmful acutely or chronically, and is actually a net benefit for society and will make Americans healthier on net. It is an evaluation of the net benefit and the harm reduction that you're bringing to bear. when you look at a company like Enjoy or Zyn, which have both been authorized, it's pretty clear that what the FDA is saying is that on the whole, these products, they might be abused by certain people. They might have some negative drawbacks, but they do more good than harm. And so the FDA has said they are suitable for the protection of public health. They can be sold legally. Now, that doesn't mean that they can sell to anyone, or they don't have to abide by marketing regulations, or they don't have to age verify people. They still have to do all that, but they can legally sell their products.
Okay, so I mean, and just to clarify for people listening, the P in PMTA stands for pre-market. So this is stuff you have to do before you have a product in front of
Unless you're a deemed product, which all
unless,
the
yeah,
major products have been deemed so
right,
far.
right, right,
But moving forward, now, if there is a new product, and realistically, this will be probably just the domain of big tobacco from now on because it's so cost prohibitive and so time intensive. It will be very hard for new companies to go through that process because it could take years, millions of dollars. How do you justify that to investors before you can show traction in the world? So if you're going to build a competitor to Zyn, you're going to say, "Hey, I got a better Zyn. Trust me." It'll just be 5 years until we can start selling this thing. And it's like, after you get approved, well, then you still got to go beat Zyn. Like, that's really
right,
hard.
right, right, right.
And there's a whole bunch of other companies it's a very crowded market already. So the pre-market, it's more of like a vision towards the future because of this deeming rule. Um, but yes, that is technically what it stands for.
So just to be so, I'm just trying to get a sense of how onerous and how sort of niggling it is. The amount of data you have to provide, the number of hoops you have to jump through. Like, I remember reading somewhere, like, you have to get like the color approved, or did I
Oh
make
yeah,
that up?
everything. Yeah, yeah. I mean, everything. I mean, I don't know if this is a rumor or if this was reported, but I think Juul, when they were denied, the denial was based on something around a machine that is used to make part of the Juul. They didn't give the model number for the machine that makes that piece of the product, and they had the number, but they didn't give it to the FDA in the application. And of course, the Juul folks were upset because they were like, "Wait, we would have happily told you that if you asked us." And so a lot of it hasn't necessarily been that the FDA has been historically uh, like asking for too much information. I think it's actually great that they can make an informed decision with a ton of data, and they should have all the data. The problem is that the PMTA is not a form that you fill out. It's not like there's some guidance, but it's very opaque because anytime the FDA says,
Oh.
this is exactly what we want, if you give them that and then they make a mistake, then they're open to lawsuits. And so there's all these like odd back channel communications, and I mean, even the whole process for proposing new rules. The FDA has something called the ANPRN, or ANPRM, which is the Advanced Notice of Proposed Rulemaking. So if they want to change a rule, an FDA law or rule, they don't just propose the rule. They issue an advance notice saying, we are going to propose a new rule. So then people can chime in and say, if you do this, you're going to destroy my business,
Right.
which will
Right.
have $1 billion impact, and I will sue you for destroying my business. So get ready to fight. Or, hey, that's actually reasonable. We're fine. Most of the time, it's the former from the big guys. But yeah, it is onerous. There's a lot that you have to put in. You have to turn over any data that you generate around your products. You have to share. A lot of that is good. It's really just the speed and the fact that the FDA has been historically somewhat opaque about what they want, that's made it very difficult for companies to build their PMTAs. It would be a lot easier if they had put out a playbook for how to build a PMTA that is ironclad, but instead there's a lot of like technical jargon that can easily be misconstrued. And because they're so overwhelmed from COVID, so overwhelmed from the vape crisis, there's been a lot of incentive internally to find technicalities to just cull the herd, because they got millions of these applications. They have a lot of people working there, but not that many. And so anything that they can do to kick back an application is in their favor and buys them more time. Now they are ranking applications uh, by market penetration. And so with vaping, they did Juul first. Obviously, Juul was the biggest product, and with pouches, Zyn was the first one that they authorized, and that makes sense because Zyn is the 800-pound gorilla in the category. And so they've made some reasonable decisions, but it's all been very slow. And I think what frustrates a lot of people in the industry is that the FDA was able to approve the COVID vaccines in something like 3 to 9 months. Like, it was pretty fast between Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson and Johnson developing the vaccines to them being approved, at least with an emergency use authorization in EUA.
Yeah.
Um, and if they can, and the vaccines, like, it's more complicated than throwing some
Yes,
tobacco
it's a
free
lot
nicotine in
more
a pouch.
complicated.
And so when I look at vaccines a year, Zyn 10 years, I'm like, this isn't quite right. Like, scientists should all agree that it's easier to evaluate the potential benefit or harm of tobacco free nicotine thrown in a pouch. It's been used in Sweden for like 40 years. This is not like entirely new technology. It's not some new mechanism. We've studied the nicotinic
Yes.
receptor and how nicotine affects humans for generations now. There's tons of studies about it. This is not rocket science, and so it should move faster. And there was a little bit of, for the last couple of years, it was very political. And if you did sign off on the dotted line and said, I approve this product, and then it wound up being bad, you're going to lose your job. So it became
Right.
it became highly political. But hopefully we're in a new era, and the FDA will move quicker, which is, I think, what everyone in the industry is hoping for.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know if you've seen that meme. We're getting close to tax season, where it's like the IRS says you owe me money, and then the guy says how much, and then they
I
say
don't know.
guess.
Guess, yeah. It's like,
And
what if I get it wrong?
it's
You go to
such a
jail.
funny meme. And so it's basically like, what do I need to tell you to get my product to market? Guess.
Yep, yep.
That's
I mean,
crazy. And just
uh,
to be
yeah.
clear,
In
is there
general,
like a
yeah.
back and forth, or
Yeah, there's a little bit
it,
of back and forth. It depends on how big your company is. Obviously, if you're, a $200 billion company and you have a whole office in DC, you're going to be able to pay more lobbyists. You're going to be able to get more face time, and that also makes sense. Like time is scarce at the FDA, but there isn't as much back and forth as I think people expect. I think in general, like, if you've ever been to the DMV and you've seen how the DMV operates, it's a pretty reliable. It's a pretty reliable extrapolation to assume that every government organization works basically similarly.
right?
And so, yeah, it's not exactly like NASA on the moon mission over there.
Okay. Well, I mean, thank you for confirming some stereotypes about the government. It's interesting because I talked to a bunch of people in pharma, and they were actually and not big pharma companies, even smaller ones. They were actually appreciative of the FDA. They said the big problem is the NIH. So
Mm.
it's interesting to get those perspectives. I mean, there's so many directions I could go. I guess the first one is the economics, which is basically everything you've told. It is basically like it's 101 of how to create a cartel and how to essentially like create rents for big companies and make it impossible for small companies and entrepreneurs to compete. There was this study on tobacco done not long ago that basically showed that when you ban tobacco advertising in a country or whatever, the market shares stopped moving.
Of course.
And when you think about it, it makes perfect sense, right? Because how do you defeat how do you compete in the marketplace? By advertising, right? And so, going back to Marlboro, if you're Altria, it's actually maybe not such a bad proposition to have advertising banned and to have all of that stuff, because you essentially like have a rent. Like Marlboro, is the Nike or the whatever, the IBM of cigarettes, and is going to remain that way forever.
100%. Yeah, I
Um,
mean, there's a reason why the master settlement agreement was agreed to by Big Tobacco. It was negotiated by Big Tobacco, and they gave on the things that would eventually benefit them, for sure. And there are a number of drivers of power law outcomes in the category. Marketing is not one of them anymore. Regulation is becoming one. Um, but distribution monopolies exist, and then also just brand monopolies. Like, to your point, Marlboro is still the dominant cigarette, and when a filmmaker, even though it's illegal to pay for product placement in movies, when a filmmaker wants to characterize a character as a smoker, because what that says about them, maybe they're the gritty detective and they smoke cigarettes, they're still going to pick Marlboro, because it would be weird if they picked something generic. It would just be jarring for the viewer. And so these monopolies exist for a very, very long time.
yeah, and well, that's just the way it works. I mean, I I also, I mean, when you said, "Oh, we want to find out if we're doing more bad than good, this could have this negative effect, this positive effect." But that's impossible to prove. That's impossible to know with certainty over 20 years, over millions
I
of
mean, I
consumers.
I would somewhat disagree with that,
Okay, well, good.
because tobacco-free nicotine has been used for 60 years. Like, we have data from Nicorette. Nicorette was introduced as a tobacco-free nicotine product to help people quit smoking, and while the label recommends that you use Nicorette for 2 weeks or a few months and then wind down and never consume nicotine ever again, there is a sizable cohort of humans who quit smoking, used Nicorette, and never stopped using Nicorette. And so I run into people all the time who said, older guys who say, "Oh yeah, I smoked in college back in the 60s or 70s. I quit using Nicorette. Now I chew Nicorette every single day." And so we can look at that data and see the effect that long-term nicotine use has, pure nicotine, tobacco-free nicotine, and we can bridge that data from that to nicotine pouches and other nicotine gum products. And so I do think that there is some sort of scientific ground truth that you can get to with these products. And I think the FDA agrees on that. I think the entire industry agrees on that. That might be the one thing that everyone agrees on.
Okay, so that's that's a very good observation. I had no idea that Nicorette was so old.
Oh yeah,
Okay, well, can you talk a bit about that? Like what the long run studies of
totally.
non-tobacco nicotine use shows?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so nicotine, it's important to understand kind of the evolution of how nicotine is perceived, because cigarettes were so harmful that I mean, 500,000 people died in the United States of smoking during COVID. COVID killed 460,000 people at the peak. Cigarettes still killed more people. 8 million people a year globally die from cigarettes. Like, it was so bad, it made sense to hit it with the biggest hammer possible, and that hammer was everything about cigarettes is bad, right? And that's very logical. It makes sense. And so did they throw the baby out with the bathwater by kind of demonizing nicotine as well? Yes, but the impact was that less people smoked, and so it was probably worth doing. Now people are going back and looking at, okay, well, can we do rat studies on the carcinogenicity of nicotine? Can we see if we dose rats with nicotine over their entire lifespan, will they get cancer? No. Um, What about this Nicorette study? If we look at people who have been consuming non-tobacco nicotine for their entire life, what does their health outcome look like relative to somebody who smokes cigarettes? Well, they don't get cancer. And so, or they don't get cancer at elevated rates over just your average person, right? There's no increase off of baseline. Now, there are other factors that go into long-term nicotine use. Things like people worry about blood pressure, people worry about just the addiction and the fact that you're using it so long. That has an economic cost, of course. If you become addicted to something and you're using it constantly, that has an economic cost. Um, but the main thing that changed culturally over the past decade has probably been that nicotine is now known by more people, not everyone, to not be a carcinogen. And that has been recognized by not only FDA, but also the state of California. They have propositions, is it Proposition 65, which even when you walk into a Starbucks for a while, it would say this coffee has chemicals that are known by the state of California to cause cancer and birth defects. And you see the gas stations, Prop 65 warning, hey, there's chemicals here. And nicotine is not on the Prop 65 list because the evidence is so overwhelming that nicotine is not a carcinogen. And so just getting that out but it's so delicate to message that from a scientific communication perspective. Andrew Huberman had a hour-long podcast all about nicotine, breaking down the science, and he certainly popularized. I think 1 million people watched that video, and more people have kind of repurposed it. So the information is getting out there, but it's very hard because as soon as you put up a billboard that says nicotine is not a carcinogen, people are going to immediately think, oh, well, I can start smoking cigarettes again. And that's not true at all. That's not true at all. Like cigarettes are super carcinogenic. Like you do not want to smoke cigarettes. And so that kind of nuanced information is super, super hard to relay to the public en masse, whether you're a nonprofit or you're the government or you're a company. It's a very nuanced take to say cigarettes are bad, but nicotine isn't a carcinogenic, but nicotine is addictive. And so if you took the nicotine out of cigarettes, the cigarettes wouldn't be addictive, but they would be carcinogenic. It's like it's too many things to hold in a slogan. And so that's why it's still somewhat demonized and still somewhat like controversial.
Yeah, I mean, I I think it's a question of time because I frankly hadn't realized it until very recently, and I follow this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, I don't follow it, but I'm interested. Um, let's talk, if you can. Let's talk about the benefits of nicotine because I know people have opinions about that. I think that it's a sort of natural antidepressant, natural mild stimulant.
Yeah.
I have a friend who has he's a very good statistician, and he sort of says it as a joke, but also the numbers do work. It's just there's so much statistical noise it doesn't mean much, but basically he correlates the rise of obesity to the to the reduction in smoking.
Yeah. Yeah. I've seen that correlation before. There's a lot of different things going on there with things in the food system and hyper processed
Yeah.
foods and
Yeah,
just
yeah,
the
yeah. That
cost of
it's
food
not a
going down.
scientific proof, right? You can't take,
Yeah.
60 years of
Yeah.
social change and, like, plug 2 lines and be like, "There you
Exactly.
go."
Yeah. There's like a
That's
million
not
other
how
things going
social
on.
science works, but it's still a pretty funny graph.
Yeah, and there's also the studies on Alzheimer's and Parkinson's, and there's some like early data that maybe says it's neuroprotective, but uh, I think there might be other ways to protect against those that might be commercialized. But I mean, at the most basic, like nicotine is a mild stimulant, uh, somewhat at the level of caffeine, certainly not at the level of any controlled substances like Adderall. And anyone who tries to tell you that nicotine is the limitless pill and it'll make you a genius, like they're trying to sell you something. I got a bridge to sell you if you're hearing that. Uh, but it is a mild stimulant. It's been used
Damn
for
it. Damn
generations
it.
by that. Yeah, it's been used for generations for that exact purpose. And you can go back through history. Soldiers in war, they just need something to kind of keep them alert in the trenches, and they pick up a smoking habit, and they smoked for the nicotine. Like that is why they smoked.
Yes.
There's this interesting thing where if you ask someone, why do people smoke? They will often tell you because it's cool. And then if you say, but why did they start? They'll say, or they'll say because they're addicted, and then if they say why did they start, they'll say because it's cool. And those two things are true. Like cigarettes culturally for generations were very cool, and they were advertised very heavily, and they were made cool by marketing agencies and by filmmakers, and they are very addictive. But the reason that tobacco became adopted by humans over smoking, I don't know, pine needles or something, and or anything else. I mean, you could smoke, tomato leaves or eggplant or whatever. But the reason that we choose to smoke or use or extract nicotine from tobacco leaves is because it is a stimulant, and the effect of that is, mildly more alertness, less sleepy. That's the main thing of what a stimulant does. And so there are obviously diminishing marginal returns. If you use a lot of it, you won't be as stimulated. It also has an interesting effect where the half-life is much shorter than caffeine. So the half-life for caffeine might be 6 hours, 8 hours, something like that. And so
I
a lot
believe
of
that's
people
true. Yeah.
say that, if I have a coffee at 4 p.m., it'll throw off my sleep schedule. I won't be able to fall asleep at 9.
Yes.
That's not the case with nicotine, because the half-life of nicotine is more like 45 minutes. And so
Oh,
some, like the biohacker community has occasionally recommended nicotine as an alternative to caffeine in the afternoon. Now, realistically, like the drawback here is that nicotine is way more addictive than caffeine. And so it's much harder to manage effectively. Like you really, really have to use a lot of willpower to not just be using the product endlessly and actually get a stimulative benefit. Because if you're using it every single day, much like caffeine, you'll be in the mode of like, don't talk to
right,
me before I've
right,
had my
right.
coffee, right? And so when you're using caffeine 400 milligrams every single day, all of a sudden you're not some superhuman. You're just not delivering and not stimulated unless
Yes,
you have your
yes. It's
stimulation.
it's a
Uh,
treadmill.
and so yeah, it's a treadmill. And so there are some benefits, but some drawbacks, and those need to be weighed. I think the most exciting thing in the category remains just getting smokers to switch to alternative products.
Yeah. I mean, I so this is the time when we can get into this sort of broader philosophy, which is about public health. Like I've often had, like many people, I've thought a lot about this stuff during COVID.
Yeah.
And one of the conclusions I came to as a smoker back then, I've quit since then,
Mhm.
um, is that smoking, or the public health response to smoking, sort of broke the minds of everybody in public health.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, you had the science was really, really good,
Yeah.
um, both in terms of the quality of the studies and what it showed. And then you had this sort of whole of society effort. You kind of bullied people, actually.
Mhm.
You sort of lectured them morally. You used all of this sort of coercive but sort of passive aggressive apparatus to sort of get them to quit smoking.
Mhm.
It was actually an enormous success. Like, smoking is way down from what it was in the 60s. Like, it's a huge drop off, and millions of lives were saved.
Yep.
And it was a huge success, but it sort of created this template in people's minds that they try to then fit to everything,
Yes.
because they want to replicate a success like that. And so, but maybe your science on the thing you want to ban isn't that good. If you think of the war against fat, right, and nutrition, and maybe you can bully people and they'll be okay with it if it's obviously bad and it gives them cancer, but maybe they're not going to be okay with it. And maybe they're not going to be okay with a moral lecture from their government if the benefits are less clear.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it
Um,
comes down to the people involved. Like, if you were a crusader against smoking in the 80s or 90s, you had become victorious by 2010, but you're 20, 30 years in your career. What are you going to do? Just hang up
Right.
the towel and go home and retire? No, like these are organizations. Like there are people with
Yes, that
jobs and with
too.
careers, and so yeah, they have to continue and they have to keep working on something. And so they, I think, correctly went after the EVOLI, the acute lung injury that was happening from vitamin E acetate in cannabis vapes. And then in some ways they turned their sights on Zyn during 2023, 2024 to less success. But there's been a number of different campaigns, and some of them have been more successful. But it is tricky because it's hard to just say, "Hey, mission accomplished." Most companies, most careers do not have a finite end. You want to just continue. If you're Apple, you want to just continue to sell more iPhones, and once everyone has an iPhone, you launch the iPad, and then you launch the VR headset, and you're going to continue. They're not just going to say our mission's done. Everyone has a nice phone. Okay, we're going to hang it up and go home. You're not just going to shut down the company. And so it's the same thing for if you're advocating for people to stop smoking and you win and no one's smoking anymore. Not entirely true because people still smoke. Like it's still $100 billion industry in the United States.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Um,
but
but so I think there's
it's
still a
way
lot more work
down
to
from the
do.
peak.
But it's a lot like the easy gains are not there anymore because less and less, fewer and fewer kids are picking up smoking, and so the majority of the market is driven by fewer and fewer smokers who are just paying higher and higher prices. That's kind of the financial secret in big tobacco is that they have a declining customer base because people are getting older, people are dying, and new people are not starting to smoke. And they are happy with that because they don't want to kill anyone anymore. Like they're over that. They want to move on to new products and new form factors, but they need to keep their businesses going. And so what they're doing is they're just as people smoke less, they are raising their prices and their revenues are flat and their profits are increasing because of that, even though they have a smaller customer base. And I was joking online a long time ago that if you extrapolate it out in 30 years, there will be exactly one smoker who pays $50 billion a year on cigarettes because they will just continue to do this as they lose 2% of the customers and they raise prices 2%. They lose 2% of the customers, they raise prices 2%. They just keep doing it. But now they're under pressure because people are really, really switching in droves to new products. And so that's why every single big tobacco company, they have a vapor product, they have a pouch product, they're getting into other alternatives. They're doing lots of different things to kind of protect their downside as their market shrinks.
Well, makes sense. I mean, the other thing about this is so in politics, there's this saying which is "who whom," which is actually a quote from Lenin. And the idea behind that is, when you make a political argument, you're always sort of appealing to these grand principles. You're sort of, um, talking in the abstract, but really, much of the time, let's not say all of the time, but much of the time, you know, really you have like there's one group of people who are in your camp who you're trying to help, and then there's another
Mm-hmm.
group of people who you don't like, you're trying to hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And many times, if you look at the sort of public health approach around smoking slash nicotine, it really feels like you're trying, you know, people think that smokers are bad people.
Yeah, totally.
And
I hear what you're saying.
there's two evidences of that to my mind. The first one is smoking pot, which in terms of burning leaves and inhaling the smoke into your lungs is just as bad as smoking tobacco, and there's even some evidence that it's worse.
Yeah.
And the second one was the reaction to vape, and especially vapes, but generally non-tobacco nicotine products. What it seems that if you're trying to get people to quit smoking, it's obviously a good idea. But if actually you think, well, people who smoke are bad people, so
Yeah.
they should be punished for their dirty, immoral behavior.
Yeah.
And so I'm not going to let them enjoy a product.
Yep.
Actually, it makes a lot of sense. And so I don't know. Do you get that sense?
Yeah, I definitely hear what you're saying. Especially nowadays, there's a lot of oh, this is about personal responsibility for cigarettes. Like the information's out there, you should make an educated decision. I mean, it's tough because like consumer habits are very sticky, they're very habitual, and the smoker is not only addicted to the nicotine, but they are also addicted to the experience of the oral fixation of the cigarette and what it means. And oh, I just like getting out of my office and just taking a break. And yeah, maybe vape doesn't do
Yes.
that for me, or maybe pouches don't do that for me. But I mean, I think it's super important that we continue to have empathy for these folks and view them more as victims of a broken system that ran wild during the 20th century, and less as like the bad boy who's making the devil may care decision. At the same time, I know some smokers who want that aesthetic. Like they want to be seen as the person that
Oh,
is
for
making the
sure.
bad decision. And yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's also like the libertarian argument. You should let people do what they want, but obviously they were misinformed for decades. Now you can make more of a case for people know the truth, and they know more of the facts, so they can make more of an educated decision. It's all very complicated, but I do think the most important takeaway politically, or in terms of legislation or regulation, is that I just don't want an uneven playing field that benefits
Right.
cigarettes. And so when I hear during the political campaigns here in the United States, there was a big debate over Tim Walz presided over a state legislature that approved a 50% tax on pouches and non-tobacco products, right? So Zyn,
So
the price.
specifically on non-tobacco products.
Exactly. Specifically on non-tobacco products. And everyone was like, "This is terrible. This is our favorite product. You're so bad." And I get it. Like obviously, like I would love the playing field to be tilted economically towards let's make the non-tobacco product cheaper than the tobacco product. Because I hate that you can go and get, for a long time, you could go and get uh like a pack of Marlboros and be cheaper than Nicorette. Like Nicorette should be the FDA approved product should be you know 1/10 the price, right? It should be way cheaper, because then people will make a rational economic decision eventually. And
Right.
so I didn't love the idea
And
of
there is data to show that, like, whenever you increase taxes on cigarettes, particularly from Europe, there is a small but, like, very noticeable and clear
yeah,
drop in
it
the
it
number of people who
it's the
smoke. So
worst
that
of all
does.
products, because it's addictive, and so generally, if you raise prices back when the cigarettes were the only game in town, you could put any tax on it, and people were so addicted they'd pay it. Now people will switch somewhat. So my main takeaway was like, I just don't want an unlevel playing field where non-tobacco nicotine products are getting increasingly taxed to the point where they are more expensive, and cigarettes haven't been increased in tax at all. Like I would rather have a situation where, hey, look, we're raising the taxes on everything. Everyone's going to get a 50% tax increase, and that's acceptable. Like, but what I really hate is the situation where they say, "Hey, look, Marlboro, they don't have to submit a PMTA, but all the pouch products, they have to
Yes.
spend $50 million on their PMTAs." Oh, Marlboro, their taxes are the same. Their taxes went up by 3% this year, but pouches, they went up by 50% this year. Like, how is that fair? That doesn't make sense to me at all. You should either increase the taxes everyone equally, or you should maybe increase the taxes on the cigarettes more, because we know that they're so bad, especially now that the FDA has actually done some authorization on vapor products, and they've done some authorization on, and they've actually, the FDA, we didn't get into this, but there is a step above the PMTA process. Essentially, it's called the MRTP process. So I like to think about it. This is a very generalization. I'm generalizing here, but I like to think about it as like, if you're trying to get nicotine, the FDA has three pathways that you could get nicotine in a product. Level one is the PMTA, and they don't view it this way. This is just my mental model. So level one would be the PMTA. This is what Zyn has. This is what Enjoy has. This is what Juul's going for. We're going for. Every company's going for in the non-tobacco category, not cigarettes. And that just lets you sell the product. All you can do is just sell it. You can't say it's better for you. All you can sell. You just sell it, and you say, "Warning: This product contains nicotine. Nicotine is an addictive chemical." That's the label that you have to put on there. Now, level one higher. Level two is MRTP, the modified risk tobacco product application. You file that. Now you're not trying to just say this is suitable for the protection of the health, public health. You're trying to say this is better than cigarettes. This is better for you than cigarettes. And at that point,
Oh,
you can
you
say,
you have
this
to go
is
through an entire second thing
a
just to say
second
that.
application. And the FDA has approved General Snus, which is another Swedish Match product owned by the same
Yes.
company that owns Zyn. And Zyn took 10 years to get their PMTA. Very crazy to me. They got their PMTA done for General Snus, which does contain tobacco and will give you mouth cancer if you use it enough. It's a more harmful product than Zyn, in my opinion. This is just me talking, but I think it's a more harmful product because it has tobacco in it. They got that PMTA approved in like less
Snus
than a
is,
year.
like, huge in Sweden.
And then they also got the MRTP approved, which I think is correct. I think that if I had a friend who was a smoker and they were like, look, I can't do Nicorette, I can't do Zen, I can't do Lucy. Like, what do you got for me? I'd say at least move to General Snus because the FDA has evaluated that and said that it is a modified risk tobacco product. There are still risks, but the risks are less than smoking. And so the FDA has this like kind of level 2 category. And then level 3, it's a completely different pathway, but that's what Nicorette went through. That is the drug authorization pathway. And that lets you say
Right.
this product, this Nicorette product, it is approved by the FDA to help you quit smoking. It's not just better for you than smoking. It'll help you quit smoking. And so these three, they kind of bleed together. They're not really in these tier systems, but in general, and this is actually, there is a little bit of good news, which is that some states have taxes on PMTA products that might be 50%, and then on MRTP products they might go down to 25%. And so that's the type of progressive taxation that I would 100% advocate for, because I love the idea of tilting the playing field in favor of healthier products that are less
Right.
harmful. Tax the cigarettes the most, then tax the stuff, the cigars, the tobacco leaf stuff, the chewing tobacco that is not as bad as cigarettes, but still not great. And then Nicorette and the stuff that has no tobacco, the tobacco-free pouches, the vapes that have really been studied. Let's get those to the lowest taxation rate. You can still tax it all. You can still tax it all. It's a great product to tax. I'm fine with that. But let's tilt the playing field in the right direction so we're
Got it.
incentivizing consumers of nicotine to choose the best product.
Yeah. We're getting close to the end of the hour. So
Hey,
if
no
you
worries.
had one sort of, magic, I mean, I don't like the term magic wand, but one suggestion to sort of at the federal level,
Yeah,
to sort of streamline either, some reform to the FDA or something like that, like the one thing that you
yeah.
would think would be healthy.
I mean, the easiest thing is just more transparency. Just let the companies know where they're in the queue, when they're expected to be reviewed, what they are looking for in terms of review. That's probably the easiest and biggest thing. The industry generally is looking for product standards as well, something that would allow companies to make slight changes within a known bound. So, for example, I have a 4 milligram product and an 8 milligram product. Both of these have PMTAs submitted and they're accepted for review. The FDA is reviewing them. Assuming the FDA authorizes both of these, I would love to be able to do a 5 milligram product, a 6 milligram product, a 7 milligram product, a 2 milligram product. I want a 1 milligram product, right? Like I should be able to do those because it's such a slight change. You've already studied all this stuff. Help me get my products out faster, right? And I'm not talking about putting in a new ingredient. I'm just talking about adjusting the dose, even downward, right? If I have a 4 milligram
Right.
product, why should I have to do a whole new application for a 2 milligram product? I mean, I should have to turn in something to prove that it's actually half as strong and all of that, but like that should be quick, right? Because you've already studied everything else about it. You've studied the packaging, you studied the ingredients, you studied the formula, you studied the tin that this is in. You've looked at all of our stuff, you've toured our facilities, we're good to go. And now we're just saying, hey, we're just tweaking this one little thing. That should be quick, and that's something that currently is not quick. Currently, it's start over from scratch, same onerous, same huge application. And yeah, there's some economies of scale. We can run some of the lab work again for cheaper and stuff. But again, it's like, how long will it take you to approve it? It could be years. Who knows?
Right.
Like, and
Right.
and how do
Right.
I underwrite that as a business person? Okay, I turned in my application for a 2 milligram pouch. If it's going to be 10 years, and it costs me 5 million to get this application in, or even 1 million, it's like, well, now I got to think, what am I going to do with that million for the next 5 years versus, hey, it's going to come back in 3 months. and I know it's going to come back in 3 months. So I'm happy to pay the million now because I'm going to be able to get this on shelves and start making money in 3 months. And that could be really good. And so I think it's transparency and then product standards.
Very good answer. And we have one final question that we ask every guest on the show. Please recommend a book. Can be any book, fiction, nonfiction, old, new, that's not related to your area of expertise.
That's funny. I had a million that were related.
Yeah, yeah, that's why we
Not
catch
related.
people.
I would recommend this book by Alex Karp. It's called The Technological Republic: Hard Power, Soft Belief in the Future of the West. Alex Karp is the founder of Palantir and the CEO of Palantir. They're a company here in America that makes software for the government, but they also make software for enterprises. They do data analytics. They're very popular because of the AI boom. But he has a very interesting thesis on how geopolitics will evolve over the coming decades. And he also tells just a fantastic story of building a business that's worth now over $200 billion and has really done some incredible things in technology and artificial intelligence. And so, highly recommend picking that up.
That's a very good answer. It's been on my list. Well, I guess since it came out.
Yeah,
All right. Oh my God, we're doing almost exactly 1 hour.
perfect.
That's just talent right there.
Here we
All
go.
right, John Coogan, thank you very much. This was
Thanks for
very
having me.
interesting, and good luck to you, and good luck to everybody who loves nicotine.
Good luck to you too, Pascal. It was great talking to you.
Bye.
We'll talk